Welcome to Wake Up and Lead. I'm your host, Hampton Dorch, and today we are going to be talking about Gen Z's biggest problems. And I want to start by saying that I am a zillennial. That's what I call myself. Depending on what you look up on Google, my age falls into either the very beginning of Gen Z or the very end of a millennial. Most would say me being 26, born in 1997, am technically a millennial, but there's a lot of things about me that kind of like overlap. Like, for an example, I did have a flip phone, but like primarily growing up, I did have an iPhone. So a lot of the millennials I know had a flip phone for a while. They also grew up listening to Linkin Park. And like I grew up hearing more of like Taylor Swift. So there's kind of the overlap here. I'm a tweener. I'm in the middle of millennials and Gen Z, and I actually like that because I feel like it gives me an opportunity to have some like credibility and respect with some of these millennials, but then also be like young and relevant enough to speak to Gen Z. And Gen Z is getting a lot of crap. Every generation, every new generation does. Millennials have been getting it for the last 15 years, and I'm sure that Gen X did before them. And there's this quote that everybody says: "Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." So hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. I would say that we're probably in hard times right now when it comes to our world in America, what the next generation is looking like right now. If you look back at recent history, I mean, uh, you've had hard times throughout America that have created these strong men who have created good times, and in the good times we get complacent, so that creates weak men, and the weak men creates hard times. I feel like at this stage in 2024, we had a lot of weak men, and that's created hard times, and I would agree with that. And so I just wanted to start off by saying that that is sort of a thesis of just Gen Z right now and Generation Alpha behind them. And I'm talking about me and my peers as well. So I'm not like bashing on anyone today. It really, the point of this episode is to bring some awareness to what I've observed about Gen Z, some empathy for Gen Z and encouragement for them, some tips for how not to be all these negative things that people are calling them, and some tips to also lead them as well. And so I'll share a few personal stories that I have. As someone, of course, everyone's always going to say like, "Oh, we had it so much harder," or "This generation sucks." And so this is not me saying like, "Oh yeah, these Gen Z are terrible," because as I said at the beginning, I'm kind of in the middle. But I will say that like I am just a couple years outside of this just rapid advancement in technology in years that was a little bit too soon. So for me, like Snapchat came out when I was in ninth grade. I did have a flip phone. I did use CDs growing up. We did have to, rent CDs from Netflix, and we did go to Blockbuster some. So like technology wasn't like wildly accessible. And I'm going to make a point about technology here in a second, but let me start by just sharing these stories. And Dr. Tim Elmore, I did an episode with him. He's a generational expert. He's one of John Maxwell's thought leaders. He says Gen Z was ambushed by technology. Gen Z was ambushed by technology, period. So here's a couple stories that will show you that. So I went to Samford University, not Stanford, Samford, small private Christian school in Birmingham, Alabama. And we have this, decade, 75-year long tradition called step sing. Essentially, it's show choir on a stage. You pick a theme and you sing and dance for 6 minutes. And I was a Sigma Chi at Samford. Great fraternity, loved it. Some of my best friends are from there, served in there a lot, got to be the president. I also led step sing because I don't know if y'all know this, but I was a choir kid growing up. I love singing. And so there would be like three leaders, three directors leading 75 men. And most of these guys have never been on a stage in their life. Most of them never did choir. Most of them have certainly never danced on a stage. And so what you have to do is convince 75 guys to buy into this vision and sing and dance on the stage for 6 minutes. My senior year, we actually won 2020 Cavemen. Look it up. It was sick. But in my 4 years of step sing, which I did 4 years of, every year, we would practice for like 3 hours a night for 2 weeks. And on the breaks, somebody would turn on music and then the guys would sit around and talk. There would be guys like wrestling. There'd be guys cutting up with each other, arm wrestling, like just like being dudes. And that happened like every year in practice. But when I was a senior, I noticed something about the freshmen. And if you're a freshman who is a freshman, I was a senior, I love you. Y'all are like amazing. This isn't a bash on you. It's just a generational thing. I noticed something. Instead of them engaging and kind of wrestling and talking like we used to, they were like almost all of them sitting on the back wall looking down at their phones. Like and all of them were doing that. It was so interesting to me, and it wasn't anything about like them as people specifically. I think it was like literally their age group. Like, so I got a little bit distracted because I am home alone with Mary Collins today, and she woke up from her nap, and so I am back. But basically, I was telling a story about during step sing, these guys were sitting on the back wall instead of engaging with other people, and they were scrolling on their phones. And it's nothing against them. It's just something that I noticed. It's like, oh, this is a little bit more normal because from a just much earlier age, we've grown up with screens of technology and social media and reels and all of this stuff. So I started noticing that a little bit. Then, another young guy that I have in my life who's, a teenager, I've kind of been around him for a long time. And I noticed that like he and his friends, they didn't even like text. Everything was over Snapchat. Like we're always like, Snapchatting. And it wasn't even like, oh, we're talking about this. It's like just constantly sending like just pictures of you just over and over and over and over again. And it's almost like I noticed that there was less like in-person hanging out. It was more like playing video games with one another, or like just like sending Snapchats constantly. So like these are people that are only 3 and 4 and 5 years younger than me. And if I think about the timeline of like when I got my iPhone and stuff, a lot of these people were getting it like in middle school. And then when they got their iPhones, Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and all these things were coming out. And so I can only imagine how much I've already been affected by technology and how much better off people older than me are from a technology health standpoint. But now people at way too young an age are getting impacted by it. And so the whole point of that is that Gen Z has been ambushed by technology. That's what Tim Elmore says. And speaking of, he has this acronym called SCENE. SCENE. And I've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think it really sums up our world today and a lot of what Gen Z is in. So Gen Z was born into a world of speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. So if we're looking at the acronym SCENE, SCENE, speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. So speed, high speed internet at all times, or microwavable food for everything, like, or fast food restaurants, convenience. Everything is in your little town. You don't really have to go far for anything. And also, like, if we need to look something up on the internet, it's just convenient. It's right there. Entertainment, there's no such thing as boredom because we have our phones to constantly be scrolling on. If we're standing at line at the grocery store or the coffee shop, we're not looking around or talking to somebody. We're scrolling. Nurture, we've been saying safety first, safety first, safety first. Like Tim talks about when he was on my podcast, how growing up, he'd sit in the back of his grandpa's truck and they would ask him to go over the bumps. Now, like, he would be taken to prison for doing, or his grandfather would be taken to prison for doing something like that. And then entitlement, I think entitlement just kind of comes on the back end of maybe some of the easy times that we're in as we look back into the quote that I shared from earlier on. And so what do we notice about speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement? Well, what are the opposite of all of those? Slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor. So the opposite of speed is slow. We know that slowing down is good. I am struggling so much with this right now. I'm so fast paced. And we know that it's really good to slow down and give ourselves time to recover and be able to engage in a conversation and rest. And like, we don't really do that. Speed, convenience, so slow, hard. So sorry, got a little bit confused there. Hard is the opposite of convenience. So hard work is good. Like nothing great comes on the back end of easy. And so we're not really learning the value of hard work. Boring. So it's speed, convenience, entertainment. The opposite of entertainment is boring. Boredom is good. Going outside as a kid and trying to like find something to do and like, throwing rocks into the water. Like that's boring stuff, but like that's good for you. It gives your brain time to not be just like overly stimulated. Speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, risk. So the opposite of nurture is risk. I know that's not exact opposites, but that's what Tim says when he's giving this. And our country was built on risk. The company that you work for was built on risk. Taking calculated risks is good. And then slow, hard, boring, risk, and then labor. So entitlement was kind of the last acronym, the last part of the acronym seen, and a lot of us are um, just entitled, and so labor is kind of the opposite of entitled. I'm not given anything, so I'm going to like go and work. And I think a lot of times this generation like doesn't really know how to work hard. It's like we're expecting pay raises and promotions after 6 months, and I'm hearing about that all the time in my day job. And so I say all of this not to bash on part of my generation, the younger generation behind me, because what Tim Elmore says about this acronym is that we created this. He goes, as parents, we created this world. We created the technology. We created the safety first movements. And so our children were born into this generation, and it's not their fault. So if you're Gen Z and you're hearing this right now, and sorry, I kind of like struggled through that. I didn't really have it in front of me to read. I'll say that one more time. The acronym is SCENE, SCENE. You're born into a world of speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement. And the opposite of those is slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor. And so the world that you've grown up into, all of that stuff is bad. What we need is the good stuff, but you don't see it a lot. So you basically need to do the opposite: slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor. And we're not getting that. And so if you're a Gen Z, this isn't a cop out. If you actually want to stand out, it's never been easier. And so what I'm going to do now is give you some practical tips for how to stand out. What do you do about sucking as a generation? And again, I'm raising my hand to being a part of that. Well, one thing that I actually want to talk about real quick, actually, I'll share this one more story. One of my mentors has a really good friend that's a professor at Auburn. He teaches this finance class with like several hundred students that are into it. And he was talking about all you need to do to stand out in his class is shower and make eye contact. He's like, the bar has never been lower. People show up with, they're greasy with a hat on and they won't even look at you in the eyes. They won't even smile. And so like now the bar is just like so low. And so if you're a part of the younger generation, people are expecting you to like kind of suck. And so you have an opportunity right here. I'm going to reference a book by Adam Tarnow. Adam was recently on this podcast. He's been on it twice. He wrote a book called The Edge, and it's really how to stand out. And the EDGE is an acronym for energy, diligence, growth, and endurance. And if you're a parent listening to this for your kid, or if you're a kid or someone around my age, this is how you can stand out: energy, diligence, growth, and endurance. And so I'll give you an example of what each of those mean. When I think of energy and what Adam talks about in the book, just being positive. Have a positive attitude. And I'm not talking about purple unicorns all the time. If something hard is going on in your life, it's okay to like mourn, but we have a bunch of Eeyores in our world who are always negative. If you can show up with a positive attitude, that is that's going to transfer into other people. It's contagious. Also, when I think about energy, take care of your body. Y'all know I love fitness. If you can prioritize your health from a nutrition and a fitness standpoint, you're going to have more energy, and that's just going to have an impact on you and the people around you, and it's going to help you in your life and in your career. So energy, diligence. If you can follow through on something, if you can finish strong, I did a podcast on this recently here, you're going to stand out. People, their say-do ratio is worse than ever before. I say I might do this, but I don't do it. Maybe I get distracted because I doom scroll on my phone. If you can be diligent, if you can be assertive, if you can get work done, if you can follow through, if you can finish strong, you will stand out more than ever before. Growth. If you can have a growth mindset, if you can be an aggressive learner, be obsessed with learning, you will stand out more than ever before. In a world where people scroll on their phones constantly and just fry their brains and watch hours and hours of Netflix, it's never been easier to stand out and to learn more and to get ahead than to grow. Also, I did a podcast with Adam called How to Win with Old People. Humbly, he told me I was really good at doing that. And I'm not doing anything crazy. Granted, I'm grateful for my parents that like taught me a lot about this, but what does it look like to want to learn from people that are older than you? I think a lot of the younger generation makes fun of like boomers and Gen X for just like not getting it and not being cool. Well, those are the people that hold the keys to your future, and your job promotions will be decided in rooms that you are not even in. And so from a growth standpoint, asking some of these older people, how can I learn and how can I grow from you? And then in endurance, thinking long term. We've been, bred to think short term, immediate gratification, easy buttons. The longer time horizons you can think in, the more wildly successful that you will be. If you can think it 5 to 10 to 15 years out instead of 6 months, it's going to go a long way. And I think endurance, that's what I think of there. And so um, one of the things that I wanted to briefly share about is how I missed this, y'all. I'm looking down at my notes here, and I just had to get Mary Collins up from a nap, so I'm a little bit distracted. But this is one more story I wanted to share. Our generation, the Gen Z, is being lied to more than ever before, and they're being preyed upon. These impressionable minds that are 15, 16, 17, 18 years old are watching reels on TikTok and Instagram from these like buff, good looking, stylish dudes that tell you to get into crypto or day trading or drop shipping or, move to Miami and wholesale real estate. Like, a lot of that stuff is a myth. Like, you can be successful, but only 1% of people are even successful doing it. And most of these people are just trying to sell you a course. If they were actually that successful, they probably wouldn't be selling you a course. And so I've seen a lot of guys like, say, oh, well, college is a waste of time and money. Granted, I do think that college is getting more and more and more expensive. If you have the opportunity to go, I definitely think it's like a good idea to go to college. Now, for me who got into sales, granted, having a piece of paper helped me get the job. So in the world we live in, having the college degree, even though it's a lot of money, does help you get a job. Certainly, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, yes, you need to go to college. So my thoughts on college are, I go back and forth. It was a time for me to grow and develop and grow in my faith and all of these amazing things. It was a privilege that I got to go. But all that said, these younger generations are being promised easy buttons saying you can make $10,000 a month by drop shipping and doing this. Like, all that's a bunch of baloney. And so I think that it's also just like, putting lies out there that you don't have to work hard. And so I'm just starting to see that impact the younger generation as well. I know I kind of like went back up to my stories from the beginning, but I forgot to share that as well. And so the most recent thing I talked about before that was how to stand out, how to have an edge, energy, diligence, growth, and endurance. You will stand out a ton. Now, if you are leading Gen Z, if you're a parent of one, if you have people on your team at work that are Gen Z, start with empathy. Put your empathy cap on. They were born into this world. They were handed an iPhone and social media before they should ever have it. And it's really changed the way that they view the world. Now, I think Gen Z can turn out to be an incredible generation if they can get a handle on technology. And if, maybe some of the data starts coming out about how cigarettes are bad for you, kind of like technology, maybe we can adjust a little bit. But if you're leading Gen Z, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so there are certain principles, and Tim Elmore talks about this, timeless principles that you just can't know when you're 18 to 22 to 23 to 24 years old. And I know that you know those things if you're leading them and you want to teach them to them. But there's also timely principles. And a lot of that might actually revolve around technology. So some older people, they do have a lot of things that they could learn from the younger generation. And so the best way to help someone know that you care about them is to be interested over interesting. And so if you're leading them, get to know their story, get to know what they care about. And then over time, they're going to want to learn from you, and you can share those timeless principles with them. Now, here's how I'm going to end this podcast. Here's my mic drop moment. If you're Gen Z and you're listening to this, the point that I just made talking to the older generation, and I've talked about this a couple times on this podcast before, if you make the older generation have to be interested in you so that, you can then be interested in them, you are shooting yourself in the foot. The reason I got asked to be on that How to Win with Old People podcast is not because I'm anything special. It's because I recognize that people older than me hold the keys to my future. Now, God holds the key to my future, but practically, these are the people that are deciding when I get promoted, how much money I make, if they want to introduce me to their network and everything. And so it's funny because this book, A New Kind of Diversity by Tim Elmore, is telling the older generation to be interested in you and care about you and have empathy. Yeah, all that's great. But if you can say, look, I understand I grew up in this world, and maybe, I'm entitled or whatever. I recognize that. I want to learn from you. How can I learn from you? Teach me, help me grow. You will stand out so much because nobody else is doing that. And so if you are Gen Z, people have such a low expectation for you that it's never been easier to stand out before. And so by being humble, asking questions, shutting up, and listening, it'll take you so much farther than really doing anything else. And I've found a lot of success doing that myself. And I think that you can too. I truly believe in Gen Z. I think that there's a bright future ahead. I think again, we do need to be mindful about technology and everything. But I believe in y'all, kind of me too, because I'm kind of part of Gen Z. But anyways, appreciate y'all listening. As always, it's time for you and me to wake up and lead.